Hey guys, and welcome to my new podcast episode. I'm so sorry that you had to wait so long for this episode. It's not that many people were in my DMs asking for the new episode, but still, I'm sorry for you waiting so long. But this month was just so busy and everything, so I kind of didn't make it. And when I started doing the research for this episode, I kind of got into such a deep rabbit hole that it was hard for me to get out of it again. So yeah, it took me a bit longer than usual, but here I am, and here we're going to talk today about a branch which I personally am actually not so familiar in. This is not my favorite branch of astrology, but I really like the philosophy behind of it. And as you know, my podcast kind of focused more on the intersection between history, astrology, and politics. And we are going to talk today about medical astrology. So one thing before starting, I kind of really lost my notes. I usually make notes on my Mac Apple Notes app, and there I write the whole transcript for the podcast. But this time I kind of I lost the notes. I feel my Mac is sometimes deleting my notes. I'm not sure why this is happening, but it's not the first time that I was searching for some notes but I couldn't find them. My Mac kind of deleting my notes, so I deleted my whole transcript. This is why this time I'm going to speak freely and without any notes, without any paper in my hand, because I don't have any, and I hope that I am able to present to you the information that I got in a way that it makes sense to you and it is still structured and systemized. But yeah. So today we are talking about medical astrology. And first of all, medical astrology is a branch within astrology. So some of you think that astrology is this very general thing. As an astrologer, you just know everything about astrology, and then you are doing readings, and every astrologer is kind of that's maybe different kind of readings, but still they have the same knowledge. But this is actually not necessarily true, because there are different branches of astrology and different specializations. So for example, as a historian, you do not know the whole history of everything. You maybe have this general understanding of history, but you're maybe specialized in a very specific era, or a very specific epoch, or very specific system. And astrology is the same. Every astrologer has kind of their own niche interest. Some are more general, some are very niche, and sometimes this is a thing. Specializing on one specific aspect or branch of astrology, I personally believe comes with time. So personally, I would call myself more of a general astrologer, but I do definitely have a niche interest on symbolism, on very practical astrology, on political astrology, and also on astrophilosophy. So those are my interests. Even though in a reading, I will not, yap about the philosophy, but it's still going to represent it also through my readings. So there's one branch which is called medical astrology. And I do have some basic knowledge, and I use medical astrology as well in my readings, but I'm not specialized on it. And I feel as a medical astrologer, medical astrology basically means you're having clients, and those clients have some illness or some medical issue, and then you are trying to help them, or maybe you have a client who's chronically ill and that you are trying to help them, or even if you cannot help them, you maybe will let them know in which period of time the illness is getting stronger or lesser. So this is something which is what a medical astrologer would kind of do. And this is something that I'm not so into it. I do it a bit. I do it so that I'm not doing it, but I'm not an expert in it, because personally I feel medical astrology, or this specific branch, goes with so much responsibility. Let's say, for example, you have some clients with a very big illness, and then as an astrologer you will give them remedies or tips, and then you have kind of the responsibility of them feeling physically well again. And I personally feel this is such a big responsibility. But even though I think this is something that I think of as a responsibility, because I do also have responsibility when people are coming to me and asking me about their career or about their love life, and then I'm doing predictions. So this is a responsibility as well, but I feel more comfortable taking that responsibility on, whereas taking the responsibility or the energy of a medical astrologer. And I just was not yet so kind of interested into really getting deep into medical astrology, but I definitely think it's a very interesting branch, right? And in this episode, we are going to talk about medical astrology. I'm going to give you some tips by the end to kind of see how you can use medical astrology for yourself. But the focus on this episode is seeing medical astrology not only as a branch of astrology, but more in the context of capitalism, of colonialism, and also of how astrology was historically used in medicine. So basically, astrology was historically used in medicine, and there were like so many like quotes about that an actual like doctor or like a real physician should have a degree in bachelor in astrology. So the idea was that someone working in medicine was a bit incomplete without having knowledge of astrology, because astrology was used in medicine. And this is like historically proven. So historically there are like sources where you know that people use astrology within medicine, and then later on it was used less. And there was like kind of like, there are like some breaking points in history where medicine was not anymore connected to astrology, or not anymore connected to everything which was also perceived as magic. So the body as like this thing that we have was kind of like demystified throughout different centuries, and we will talk about that a bit, and we will talk about, or will refer to Silvia Frederici, who is like anti-colonial and like a Marxist feminist who wrote a book about like witch hunting, and this is like a book I can really recommend if you're interested in witches or being a witch, because I personally feel like pop cultural or spiritual community is oftentimes using the idea or the concept of being a witch in a very like aesthetifying or romanticizing way. And they sometimes talk also about the history of witch hunting, you know, that women were being killed because they were accused of being a witch. But actually, the accusations of them being a witch has to be also seen through a capitalist analysis, and also like through a Marxist analysis, because read the book. I guess I will talk about it further on, because yeah, this is like, you know, part of my podcast structure later on. So basically, just saying that witches and medical astrology and, you know, seeing the body as this thing which is connected to the heavens was something which capitalism did not like, or was something which was a threat to capitalism. This is like also a bit similar with my first podcast episode about calendars and colonialism and time. So it's kind of like the same idea in a way, but like different again. So yeah, we will start talking a bit about the history of medical astrology. Then I will like later on talk about why medical astrology is not used anymore in hospitals or within medicine. And then we will talk about how you can use it for your own life again, in a way which is not just like talking how you can use it for yourself, but also like how this is actually like treating your body as connected to the heavens is a very anti-capitalist way of treating your body. Astrology was not always like directly used in medicine. So there was this idea, which is like going back to the 5th or 4th century before the birth of Jesus Christ, and later on like in the 2nd century, there was this idea that all bodies are made out of like humors. So they're like different humors, and those humors are called blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And this was already something like this idea of like humor theory, of like things are kind of like connected to a humoral concept, was already invented with Hippocrates. But later on, a physician called Galen kind of like added or kind of like used this theory and made a whole like medical theory out of it. Hippocrates kind of like started out with this like theory, and Galen kind of like developed the theory, and he was basically saying that the body itself, like every human body, contains 4 essential fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And each humor is corresponding to a certain element, and those elements are then connected to certain like physical and emotional tendencies. So basically, for example, blood was connected to the element of air and would make a person more optimistic and energetic. Yellow bile was connected to the element of fire and would make a person more angry but also more ambitious. Then black bile would make a person more melancholic and heavy, and black bile is connected to the energy of earth. And then phlegm is connected to the energy of water, which kind of like makes someone more calm or more slow. So basically, the idea was that the human body was connected to elements. And this concept of like the body being connected to elements was also, it was a bit relating to the idea that everything in the cosmos kind of like corresponds on everything on Earth. Even though at that time astrology was not necessarily being so detailed. Yeah, it was already linked to medicine, but not in much detail. There was this idea going on that the body is kind of like a representation of the universe. It's like part of the microcosmos. It's also like something heavenly and godly. So this idea of like the body being connected to humors and to these fluids was also accepted by the Christian church. So basically Galen is a Greek physician, or was a Greek physician, and he was like one of the most important doctors within like the Roman Empire and Christian world in medieval times. And the church would like accept his ideas because he was basically saying that the body and the soul is also connected to God. So there was like no contradiction between like God, or the idea of like humans being made by God and the body being like, or containing those like fluids. And another thing which was very important for Galen was the moon. So he definitely believed that the moon was kind of like connected to Earth. So in the way that the lunar cycles and the solar cycles are connected actually to illnesses and to the human body. So he was saying that according to the lunar cycles, there were like something called critical days of an illness. Those critical days were like the day 7th, the day 14th, and the day 20th, like after an illness started occurring. And the idea was to kind of like figure out those critical days and then say, okay, if someone like survives those critical days, they are going to live, or if like bad things are happening with the moon or whatsoever, then this person will die. So like critical days. Some physicians later on really criticized the idea of critical days, even though physicians who, for example, supported the idea of like the humors or of like astrology being part of it, the critical days have kind of like being more accepted in a way. So kind of like a summary, back then we would think the body has like those kind of like different fluids within our body, and once the fluids are in imbalance, it can make a person either maybe very angry or very depressed. The way Galen figured out how people, or like how much fluids people contained, was a bit also like by observing them. So there are actually some kind of like racist tendencies, or like nowadays we would call them, back then it was like normal as always, but like nowadays those are definitely racist theories that people, for example, who live in cold climates are seen as more intellectual. And people who are living in hot climates are more impulsive or more aggressive. So thinking about like how nowadays the stereotypes of like people in the West being more civilized or being more intellectual, and people like, you know, in other parts of the world in the global south are more aggressive, is actually really stemming from this like background as well, when medicine was kind of like developed. And even though I'm not sure, like I don't know everything about Galen, I'm not sure if he like really said or really like reproduced or like created those like racist narratives in a very intentional way, but definitely like his theories are racist because they kind of like connect a cold weather, people living in the cold, with intellectualism. So they're like in a way very problematic, but this is not necessarily the main topic I'm talking about. It's more like what I want you to understand is that back then in medieval times, the body was seen as something heavenly, and the body was seen as something which was connected to elements, to fluidity. And this is like the main aspect from here. And later on, actually, Abu Mashar, which is a medieval Persian astrologer who lived during Islamic medieval times, he kind of like added a system to that. So he was like, you know, back then those like all of those texts were kind of like translated, and in the medieval Islamic world they will like work on that. And you know how like in general astrology did not develop in one specific area, but like in different areas, and throughout time they were like, the theories were shared and developed, you know. And so Abu Mashar like developed, or like further developed, this idea that the humors were like also part of the body, but he kind of like connected it more towards the astrological planets. And he actually added the very like systemic and astronomical layer onto the idea that humors and fluids exist. So for example, he would say that the planet Saturn was this like black bile because Saturn is cold and dry. And it is not only that he said that Saturn is cold and dry, he also explained it astronomically. Because he said, for example, that Saturn is the furthest planet within the sky. So if you have like an order of all the planets, Saturn is the furthest from Earth. And if Saturn is the furthest from Earth, Saturn must be cold and dry and kind of like represent depression because it's like so far away. So Abu Mashar and other astrologers, they added this like very systemic thinking of medical astrology. So it was not only that the elements were part of the body and the moon was used during medical astrology, but also later on this thing of like the zodiac man was developed. The concept that every bodily part is connected to a specific zodiac sign. The idea that every body part is connected to a zodiac sign was already like there for like thousands of years, even like before Abu Mashar lived. But during this time of Abu Mashar, I feel like everything was a bit more systemized and more used within like actual scientific fields. The reason why is because Abu Mashar, it's a bit maybe of a conspiracy theory, but Abu Mashar was Muslim, and during Islamic Golden Age there were like Muslim astrologers, but still there were like different opinions about like how Islam and astrology can be connected and how Islam and astrology is compatible. So for astrologers like Abu Mashar, it was very important to be also astronomers because they had kind of like this drive of proving that astrology is scientific. And of course, almost like all astronomers were also astrologers, or like all astrologists were also astronomers. But I feel like with Abu Mashar and Al-Biruni, those kind of astrologers, they also talked about like how they want to, or how astrology is scientific, and because as astrology is scientific, it is compatible with Islam. So there was also this idea, and again, like he connected the ideas of Galen to a more like systematic, to a more astronomical way. So what he said, for example, or like what the system is about, Mars as a planet is, for example, connected to the energy of hot and dry. Again, Mars is the planet connected to anger, to activity, and being aggressive. So basically, Mars can represent fever, inflammation, sharp pain, and heat in the body. So if you have, for example, in the 6th house, or if you have very strong Martian energy in your chart, you can be someone who can have a lot of like inflammation. Or if your Mars is not well placed in your chart, it could be that you get acne very easily, things like that. Then Jupiter is connected to the energy of warm and moist, and it is connected to the humor of blood. It represents social energy, being optimistic, being energetic, vitality, growth, good circulation, being confident, generous. So basically, if someone has a lot of like Jupiter energy, it could be that they are like someone who is very optimistic. So then when they get ill, they go like more optimistically throughout that illness in a way. However, they can also sometimes be a bit obese. Like there's this connection with Jupiter as well, like being obese, or like being just like expanding yourself also physically, not only emotionally. Saturn is connected to the energy of cold and dry, and is connected to the humor of black bile, and it represents more melancholic tendencies. So for example, if you have very strong Saturnian energy, you can be like depressive, you feel like heavy, you feel like you always have to take on responsibilities. There may be like chronic illnesses going on, like your legs may be hurt, your bones are maybe hurting. The moon is connected to the energy of the humor of phlegm, which is cold and moist, and it can really be connected to emotional fluctuation and everything connected to cycles. So for example, your menstrual cycle, your bodily fluids, everything with water, like having water within your body, those kind of connections can be there. And the sun is hot and dry, but it is more of a life-giving heat, and it is considered as a very special case because the sun is not a humor itself, but it governs the vital spirit, it governs vital energy, and it supports blood and overall balance. And the interesting aspect with the sun is also that the sun in traditional astrology was sometimes seen as this like white, wise energy. Like if the sun is shining, God is shining as well. Like this energy of like this like goddess energy, the vitality, the way of like making life. This is like the sun energy. So this is also why it is more connected to a special case. Mercury can change its humor actually. It can be hot and cold, dry and moist. It really depends there on the context and is not tied to one humor, but it represents the nervous system, speech and cognition. And it can also shift between temperaments because Mercury is more seen as this like very neutral planet. The zodiac man was also very important. So the zodiac man basically means that each part of your body is connected to a specific zodiac sign. So Aries represents the head because it is the first zodiac, so it's like up here, and your feet are ruled by the sign of Pisces. Taurus represents the neck and throat, Gemini the shoulders, arms and hands, Cancer represents the chest, the breasts and the stomach, Leo represents the heart and the upper back, Virgo represents the digestive system, Libra the lower back and kidneys, Scorpio the genitals and reproductive organs, Sagittarius represents the thighs, Capricorn represents the knees and in general like the skeletal structure, Aquarius represents the calves and circulation. It's sometimes also linked to blood circulation. And Pisces represents the feet, the lymphatic system, and it's like seen as the final end of the body. You know, like the beginning is the head and the final end of the body is Pisces. And Pisces being the last one of the zodiac, therefore represents the final end. So if you have like a picture of the zodiac man, it just actually goes up from here towards the feet. So people later on worked as well with the like moon and the cycles of illnesses, and also like critical days of the theories were developed, but also the zodiac man was very important. And as I said, back then it was like very important to use astrology also within medicine. So it was very normal. So you had the zodiac man in university textbooks and medical manuscripts and surgical manuals. So it was really used. And this idea of like natural astrology, so basically the zodiac man anatomy, the moon and tides, that the seasons are affecting the body, this was also being accepted within Christianity. However, Christianity did not really like accept the idea of like predicting fate and destiny. So Christianity has like mixed feelings about astrology in general, but they did definitely like include some part of astrology, including the zodiacal man. To summarize again, astrology and medical astrology was used within medicine, it was used within universities, it was seen as something more scientific. But then times were changing a bit, and there was this guy called René Descartes, who's like one of the pioneers, or seen as one of the pioneers of the Age of Enlightenment. And basically, during the Age of Enlightenment, happening in the 17th, 18th century, there was this idea that things are becoming more rational. So, one thing that he said, for example, which he's kind of like very famous for, is, "I think, therefore I am." So basically, he was kind of like distinguishing or like differentiating between what until that point was seen as being part of existence. So he was not referring to his body of being part of his existence, but to his mind. And this is actually a very like Western approach of how we think of our body. I remember once I was in a museum in Singapore, and there was like this exhibition of like different religions and different philosophies, and it was such a nice exhibition. And there was like this phrase, "I think, therefore I am," and then one of the descriptions was talking about how in Western society they distinguish rationality from emotions, and we distinguish rationality from our body. But in other approaches, like in Eastern philosophy, the body is part of it. So it's like all once. There's a more holistic approach. So the thing of like actually distinguishing or making a split or making a difference between like your body and your ideas kind of like also further reinforce the idea that the body is not something heavenly anymore. So the body is not anymore connected to the zodiac signs, it's not anymore connected to magic, it's not anymore connected to something which is not only material. Instead, the body is becoming a machine. Descartes also said the body is divorced from the person. So basically, the body is not part of the person anymore. And Descartes also said, "I am not this body." So he's alienating himself from the body. This was part of something called mechanical philosophy, in which Hobbes and Descartes played a huge role. And I'm not going to dive so deep into it. It's more about like understanding how the ruling class, or how the system was kind of like controlling the natural world. And yeah, so I'm not getting so deep into it, but it's more about like how the mechanical philosophy kind of like had this like new concept of us alienating ourselves from our body, and therefore also alienating ourselves from the natural world. So the natural world being seen as something like uncivilized, and the mind, the rational thing, the logic being seen as something civilized, which I talked, as I said earlier, also in my first podcast episode. This concept is seen throughout like history, and throughout like how magic and astrology was not anymore seen as something which people wanted to use. And this is where also like Marxism and the idea of like capitalism or like the ruling class comes in, because mechanical philosophy, or the idea that the body is being distinguished or alienated from ourselves, then lead to the fact that the body can be exploited. So basically, in the sense, I'm quoting Silvia Frederici here, in the sense, mechanical philosophy contributed to increasing the ruling class control over the natural world, control over human nature being the first, most indispensable step. So one quote of her, for example, says that, and I think this quote is like really, really strong. She says, "We see, in other words, that the human body and not the steam engine and not even the clock was the first machine developed by capitalism." So it's really a lot about like body politics and how like once we stop seeing our body as something magical, we start exploiting it. We start living, or we start like dying, because we are starting to live for labor. We are starting to live for the ruling class because our body has actually no more value. And another thing about like medical world during that time. So before that, medical world was more like, about observation. So as I said, like a galen, for example, he observed humans, and from observation, he was kind of like saying these humans have different fluids within their body. But within like mechanical philosophy during the Age of Enlightenment, the body was actually being dissected. So you would like have bodies, and then you would get into anatomy, and then you would kind of like dissect the body, and you will like treat the body as this like material, like mechanical thing which you can kind of like dissect, and only that plays a big role. Everything else about like the magic, the soul, the energies is not playing a role anymore. So the body really did not have any value anymore, and it was exploited, and this was serving the ruling class, it was serving capitalism. Then connecting also to my first episode when it comes about like timing and everything. Okay, so basically this thing of like not treating the body anymore as something magic is also like part of the idea, or part of the concept, that magic was in fact a threat to capitalism. We talked about this a bit in the first episode, where I said that when you are living not by the mechanical clock, but you are living by the nature cycles, you are not you cannot be as exploited, right? Because if you only work, for example, 5 hours in winter because the sun is then setting, you are not working after the clock, you're not working after this like construct of time. You are working with your body, you are not working consistently, because nature is not consistent. Nature wants you to take care of your body. Nature wants you to sleep earlier, to wake up with the sun, to sleep with the moon, whatsoever. But capitalism doesn't want that. Capitalism wants you every day to be at work at the same time and working the same every day. It doesn't matter how you are feeling. Doesn't matter if you're on your period or not. Basically, your body has to be like seen as something, as a machine. So you do not kind of like try to connect to your body. So this is why, for example, as a woman, if you're on your period and you are actually feeling more like staying at home, you still have to go to work, right? Because your body is a machine, and it is not something you need to take care of in that way, or you are not going to live after your cycle, right? So this kind of a concept that magic is a threat also leads to the aspect that capitalism does not want you to manifest. So basically, magical worldviews encourage people also to believe that the nature, bodies, and reality are not controllable by the state. So you believe that you're like your own god, you have your own soul, you are not controlled by the state, but this kind of like threatened basically the capitalist idea. So you need to discipline your body, you need to optimize your body, you need to make your body more productive, more effective, which is not compatible to magical beliefs that the body and the mind and the soul were seen in this like holistic philosophy, where you kind of like want to nurture your body, or you want to observe your body and see how your body feels. No, in capitalist society, you need to optimize your body. And if you want to optimize your body, you cannot see your body as something. Your body is a product. I think we've seen this also like nowadays with women kind of like optimizing their beauty, which is also connected to the body. So your body is more of a product, more of like a gift, something being wrapped, or something being exploited in a way. Okay guys, so I didn't have any battery left on my camera, and then I was like going out with my friends, so meanwhile my camera was loading again. So yeah, basically everything is a bit darker now, my makeup is refreshed, and we are continuing with the episode. So this is where I'm kind of like talking a bit about now how you can use astrology for your own health, basically. First, I want to start off with the moon signs. Like the moon in general is representing the body. It is the things which are essential for your emotional needs, but also for your physical needs. And one thing to look at the moon is about to look at the moon in your horoscope, being like your natal moon, your moon sign. Another way to look at the moon is to look at the moon within the transit. So for example, during a new moon or during a full moon. Basically, it is like not recommended to do, for example, any surgeries around the new moon or around the full moon. And basically, it's also about seeing the moon as a source of energy. It is the sun which is a source of energy. It's kind of like representing the vital energy or a life force. But the moon in general is also about like energy. It is one of the life givers. It is one of the luminaries. So when we are having a new moon, we do not have any energy. It is about like, there is no light within the moon. So as the moon is in its waxing period, as the moon is becoming fuller and fuller and having more light, absorbing more light, we have more energy. Until to the point where the moon is in opposition with the sun and we are experiencing the full moon. This is the culmination of energy, it's the culmination of events, and usually a time which can be very chaotic, a lot of things can happen. So basically it's not good to have like any surgeries around the full moon specifically, but also like around the new moon it's not so recommended. It's better to do like surgeries, for example, after the new moon, like a couple of days after. Also, when you think about the moon being like our body and when you think about surgeries, if you are, for example, want to get rid of weight or when you want to start a diet, it is better to start the diet, for example, after the full moon, because then the moon is going to lose light again. So if you want to limit something in a way, if you want to, for example, to get rid of something, like get rid of hair, get rid of weight, get rid of clothes, get rid of anything, of emotions, it's better to do so a couple of days after the full moon, because then the moon is slowly losing light. And as it is losing light, it is representing making something smaller, getting rid of something. Even if you want to get rid, for example, of your fillers, or if you want your nose to be smaller, whatsoever, it's better to do so after the full moon. Whereas if you want to expand things, for example, you want to gain weight, gain muscles, you want to, I don't know, like inject some fillers into your face, it's better to do so after the new moon, because the new moon is going then to represent like the beginning of new things, but also like after a couple of days after the new moon, when the moon is in the waxing period, it's going to represent like, you know, like expanding things in a way. So this is a bit how you can work with the moon transits in general. But the moon in the birth chart is going to represent as well your deeply like physical needs, but also emotional needs. So if you have, for example, a moon in Aries, or if you have the moon being connected to the planet of Mars, it is very important for you, or you should, when it comes to your health, really make sure that you are someone who does take impulsive actions. Like having a moon in Aries is about getting things done fast and efficient. It's about keeping excitement in your life. And therefore it is very important for people with a moon in Aries, for example, to be able to let out their anger, to be able to express their anger, but also it is important for them to kind of like do sports. So you have to put your energy out there. If you do not do that, you can have issues with inflammation, you can have actually even like issues with getting into an accident. Because think of like anger and fire being an intense energy. And if you do not let that out, like if you, for example, keep your emotions to yourself and do not find a way to let them out productively, it can also then be that you might get into an accident or you might have a very bad headache. You know, like the energy will manifest itself somehow. So with moon in Aries, it's a lot about like anger. It's a lot about like intensity, but it's also about speed. Sometimes I feel like people with a moon in Aries or Aries energy in general can be very like stressed out in a way, and they want to make everything very fast. They want to move fast. With a moon in Taurus, your emotional needs are going to be about safety a lot. Safety, it's a lot about like your throat chakra as well, like your throat in general. So like making sure you take care of like your voice. For example, stimming is a very good thing for your health physically and emotionally. Moon in Taurus is also like a lot about sensual energy, so taking things slowly. It's very important for your emotional, mental, and physical health to be able to have a routine where you take things a bit more slowly and to have your comfort food around you, for example. It's very good, like physically, to do massage. You see, when I'm talking about the moon sign, I'm not only talking about like the physical things, because having this like holistic approach towards like medical astrology, it's about like emotions and health mentally and physically are connected. So the moon in Taurus is not only about like having a massage or like taking care of your throat. It's also about like moving slowly, allowing yourself to have time, not stressing out, right? Whereas maybe a moon in Aries wants to move fast. A moon in Taurus needs to kind of like learn to move also slowly. And with the moon in Gemini, it's all about like, you know, the shoulders, the hands. So it's about the nervous system basically. A moon in Gemini can maybe like sometimes want to rationalize their emotions in a way. They want to rationalize their emotions. They may be like also an overthinker. So basically, your mind is very stimulated, maybe too much stimulated, maybe so many thoughts are going around onto your mind. So for you, it's good to have, for example, a piece of paper and a pen and just like to write things down. It's not about like actually keeping the paper. It's about having a method of like keeping your thoughts and your ideas out of your mind so your mind feels a bit more stable. Another thing which is very good for a moon in Gemini is to take care of their nervous system by walking around or like by going onto a bicycle, by reading, like by finding ways to kind of like destimulate yourself. This is like moon in Gemini, or by simply talking, like talking, writing. Those are like methods of kind of like destimulating your mind and calming your nervous system down. Then with the moon in Cancer, it's all about like the breast area. It's all about like the stomach. So if you store too much like emotion, specifically when the emotions are connected to family or like connected to nostalgia, because Cancer deals also with nostalgia. It can be that you maybe have, you know, issues like with your stomach, with your breasts. It might be also that you have issues with like your water within your body. So for moon in Cancer, it's really good like to work with water. So to drink a lot of water, to go shower, and when you feel emotionally overloaded. I feel like specifically for moon in Cancer people, because they're so emotional, it's a lot about like regulating your emotions so you can regulate your mental and physical health. And also usually the relationship to the mother and to the family is very important. So having like this comfort zone at your home is very important for your physical health. So for example, if you live in an environment in which you do not feel like where you do not feel like safe, or where you do not feel like emotionally met, where your emotions are not met, it might be also really hard for you physically. Like, you know, your physical health can actually like suffer under that. Then for moon in Leo, it's all about like the back and the heart. I often had clients with moon in Leo or sun in Leo where actually one of the parents might have a heart attack at one point in their life. So it's a lot about like, actually like moon in Leo is very important to do things out of your heart, to really live life every day to the fullest. Take care of your heart, take care of your like lower back by kind of like doing maybe exercises for your back. It's a lot about like enjoying life and having trust or like having joy within life. I think specifically for moon in Leo, this is like so important to kind of like see every day as a day where you are the queen or the king, and you kind of like want to have a party every day. And this party doesn't mean to be like exhausting, but it means it's about like enjoying life every day. Otherwise your heart can literally suffer under that. So take care of that. Then also like the relationship to the father can sometimes be amplified through that, and the relationship to like how much attention you get. So if you feel like you're someone who gets too much attention or not enough attention, like the relationship towards attention might be a thing as well. But most important thing, to live the summer of your life every single day. Then with moon in Virgo, it's a lot about like the digestive system, and I think moon in Virgo is a lot about like, similar actually also to moon in Taurus, it can be also a lot about food. Like moon in Virgo is a lot about like, it's this sign actually connected to eating disorders. So thinking about like how you deal with food, how you deal with criticizing yourself when it comes to food, how you deal with like organizing your day. And those things about like stressing out over small things can really like make you physically suffer as well. So Moon in Virgo can sometimes also deal with like chronic illnesses or like any chronic pain or like some annoying diseases, like having some annoying allergies or something like that. So for you, I would like really recommend thinking about like how you can decline or like make your life less stressful and create more efficient systems, and even like having maybe people at your home who work for you, like for example hiring a cleaning lady or hiring someone who kind of like helps you with the everyday stuff within your life. This is like really Moon and Virgo thing, remedy for like having less stress in your life. With the Moon in Libra, like you have to take care of your kidneys, you have to take care, I think, of your emotional balance in a way. It's also like, I think a Moon in Libra can really be influenced physically as well by the people they are like surrounded with, because Libra represents two people. So if you are surrounded like by your partner, for example, who is like toxic, it can really indicate your physical health as well. So having people around you who give you like good energy can kind of like enhance your energy as well. Moon in Libra is also about like pretty things, so actually aesthetics can make you healthier. And I would say Moon in Libra in general, I mean, it's also like an air sign, so you're communicating your emotions, finding the balance, finding harmony within your life is very important to also like keep your health. With Moon in Scorpio, I've often seen like issues with hormonal balance, and sometimes even with menstruation or anything related to blood. So you should like definitely do some like blood checkup. You should definitely like think about your hormones, maybe testing them. Specifically if you're a woman, sometimes the period can also be influenced by the Moon in Scorpio. So those kind of like, anything connected to the genitals and to the urine things. It's also a lot about like control. So if you have like any control issues within your life, it could also be that your health is going to be attacked or like influenced by that. Moon in Sagittarius, I think it's also a lot about like exploring things. So you can enhance your health by simply letting yourself be adventurous. If you are not adventurous, if you do not let yourself explore different religions, different cultures, different kind of people, different philosophies, it could be that you might, I don't know, have health issues as well, like whatever, your thighs or something. I mean, it is not the sign which is like the sign which is kind of like connected to any like big health issues actually, but it is still a sign which is sometimes connected to obesity as well. So like expanding your body in a way, or maybe like your thyroids are working too much or not enough. So this is kind of like Moon in Sagittarius energy. So for you, it's like very important to have like something every day where you kind of like expand your knowledge and expand your mind and also take care of those thighs. So working on them is also important. Then with Moon in Capricorn, responsibility is a big factor. Like those people usually have to take up a lot of responsibility within their lives very early on, and their like knees can be a bit like of an issue, or like their skeleton in general, sometimes even their skin. So for them, like taking enough calcium, taking enough vitamins is very important, specifically because the moon does not feel very well in the sign of Capricorn. With Aquarius, it's a lot about like freedom. Sometimes there's like something non-conform about their body, like nothing which is like an issue necessarily, but something like not typical or like very untypical about their body. And for them, it's like, I think it's important to have also like massages to kind of like regulate their blood circulation. It's also good for them to move their body fast, or like to jump high, like going on a trampoline or doing like, jumping with like a rope skip. Those things are very like good actually for Aquarius energy. Also sometimes just moving yourself away from home. Like Moon in Aquarius is about like distancing yourself sometimes from your emotions or from your family, and finding like some freedom or like some space for yourself. And also like the ankles are represented by Aquarius, so if you have any issues where there, I don't know, maybe like you're lacking freedom. Last but not least, Moon in Pisces represents the feet. It represents, but also like anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes worrying about things, similar but also to Capricorn. This is also with a more pessimistic energy, but Pisces is more like worrying about things. This is also something which can be like very easily like worked against with meditation, with like working on your subconscious beliefs, with isolating yourself sometimes, with like taking care of your feet, getting yourself a pedicure, getting yourself some sweet socks, some nice shoes, you know, those kind of things. The feet represent the balance of the whole body. So in order to have like a balanced energy as a Pisces moon, it's important to have like good feet and like taking care of your feet. This is like a bit based on the general moon sign. Of course, the way your horoscope is working really depends on the whole chart. Because, for example, if you have a moon in Cancer, but the moon in Cancer is connected to the planet of Saturn, even though your moon in Cancer represents emotions, the connection to Saturn makes it less emotional and more depressive. So actually, if you have, for example, like the planets being connected to the moon can be sometimes having a stronger effect than the sign itself. So for example, I give you an example, Moon and Mars. Like Mars represents Aries. Mercury represents Gemini and Virgo. The Sun represents Leo. The Moon represents Cancer. Jupiter represents Sagittarius and Pisces. Neptune represents Pisces. Saturn represents Capricorn and Aquarius. Uranus represents Aquarius. And Pluto represents Scorpio. I think that's all, right? Rahu can sometimes, so the North Node can also represent Uranus energy, and the South Node can also represent sometimes Neptunian energy. So if those planets are kind of like connected to your moon or to your ascendant, you should have also like, you should consider that as well, okay? That's another thing important in the chart. And the last thing which is important is the 6th house and the ascendant. So the ascendant can also represent our body. So if you have planets on the ascendant, you can kind of like connect that energy to the ascendant as well. And if you have a lot of planets in the 6th house as well, like for example, you have Scorpio in the 6th house, or in general, if you have a lot of 6th house planets, it can mean that something like chronic illnesses or like stress is being activated. And if you have 6th house and 12th house planets, this is even stronger because the 12th house represents the mental health and the 6th house represents the physical health. So when you have one of those houses being activated, it can sometimes be that you're either being activated through the mental health or through the physical health. And even further, the 12th house represents isolation, so it represents hospitals, and the 6th house represents your everyday doctor. So for example, if you have a time where you go, like where your 6th house is being activated and you're not going to the doctor, it can end up you going to the hospital instead, you know, like the 6th and the 12th house are in an axis. And then you're going to be isolated in the hospital. Or if you're not taking care of your mental health, right, your physical health will suffer under that. So it's very important to understand that the 6th house and the 12th house are also very strongly connected when it comes to your health. And the last thing is a stellium. So if you have, for example, 3 planets in the sign of Taurus and the moon sign is not involved, the things that I said can still play a big role. Or if you have planets in the 6th house, those planets can also play a big role. So what I'm giving you here is just like some regular tips, but of course it always depends on the whole chart. So to sum it up again, I gave you like the symbols, I gave you like the energies of like each sign, of like the planets a bit, of like the planets in the moon sign, but you can use that as well for like different aspects. So look at your ascendant, look at your moon sign, look at your 6th house, at the 12th house, and at stelliums. The 6th house for physical health and for stress factors, the 12th house for mental health, the ascendant and the moon sign for the bodily aspect, and stelliums for an energetic imprint. Okay guys, I think that's actually it for the episode. It was kind of like a small introduction to medical astrology. Of course, we could like talk even more about like the specific energies and everything. And if you wish that, if you want another episode of medical astrology, I'm definitely down to kind of like do more research on the astrological part. But personally, I think, that was enough for like just the general understanding. And yeah, I'm excited to see you for the next episode, and I wish you a very good night. Bye bye.